Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gents across the globe, and today we continue with our series on ancient Egypt by looking into the Second Intermediary Period and later the New Kingdom of Ancient Egypt. Today is where we start journeying into the more recognisable side of Egypt, with some of the names and faces that you're more familiar with, such as Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, Hatshepsut, Thutmosis, Ramses, all those good folk. First of all though, we need to talk about the Second Intermediary Period. For last time we left off, the 13th dynasty had begun, and unfortunately it was full of rulers who were weaker in character and mind than their predecessors in the 12th dynasty of Egypt. And it's from here that we can introduce you to the Hyksos peoples. Now, Hyksos probably isn't their actual name. Hyksos, in fact, is yet another word of ours associated with Egypt derived from Greek. The original Egyptian word is known as Hekakasut, which again means foreign occupier. Where they originally came from, however, is also a bit of a mystery, but general consensus puts their location of origin sort of around the Levant and Syria, and it's said that circa 1782 BC, the Hyksos gained a foothold in the port city of Avaris near the Nile Delta. There are a couple of theories surrounding who the Hyksos peoples originally were. Some state that they were political leaders of their original homeland who had been driven out by invasion, whereas others still state that they may have been traders, new merchants in the port city of Avaris, who, due to the wealth they brought, were at first welcomed into the city. But then as time went on, and with the weakening of the 13th dynasty of Egypt, it was said that they gained both a political, economic, and military foothold in the city, and slowly began to increase and exert their control over the surrounding area. It is said that they took control of the eastern Nile Delta mainly through commerce and politics, often negotiating and enacting treaties with local rulers, and due to the weak mind and character of the rulers of the 13th dynasty of Egypt, this perhaps may have been easier for them. And so with time, the Hyksos came to hold total dominance over Lower Egypt as the country once again split into the two separate kingdoms of Lower and Upper Egypt, with Lower Egypt being ruled by the Hyksos and Upper Egypt being ruled by the original Egyptians themselves. So once again you've got two separate kingdoms, Upper Egypt being led by Thebes once more, and Lower Egypt being led now by the port city of Avaris, the original base of Hyksos power in the region. Here the kids go again, fighting, squabbling, blah-de-blah-de-blah. You know what? No takeaway for them tonight. Lock them in the room again. Funnily enough, however, despite this being known as the Second Intermediary Period of Egypt's history, it's not really recognised as a time of chaos or strife in the country. In fact, things may not have been as good as they were under the Golden Age of the Middle Kingdom, but it wasn't as bad as the First Intermediary Period, because despite Upper and Lower Egypt being two separate political entities in the country, trade and commerce were said to have continued to flourish between both parts of Egypt. Theban merchants and traders were still allowed to venture to the north to Lower Egypt in order to practice their trade, and Hyksos merchants and traders also travelled through Upper Egypt quite freely, even past the capital of Thebes, and on to trade with Nubia in the far south. Records of the Hyksos in the New Kingdom of Egypt often depict these peoples to be barbaric invaders who destroyed Egypt and left Thebes as the last great Egyptian bastion of the country against the invaders to the north. But evidence found suggests the contrary, that the Hyksos even contributed to and even advanced Egypt further. Some of these advancements even enabled later rulers of Egypt in the New Kingdom to set out and conquer further than any leader had before them. For instance, the Hyksos were said to have introduced horse-drawn chariots to Egypt and the composite bow. weapons and innovations in warfare which allowed the Egyptians to expand as far south as modern-day Sudan and even as far north into southern Turkey. That's right, eventually we're going to have even more empires dotting the map. The Akkadian Empire was the first, and it certainly wasn't the last either, as we all know too well. Oh dear, don't ask me to open that box just yet. To contradict the New Kingdom Egyptians again, the Hyksos were also said to have adopted Egyptian fashion, architecture, and even elements of their religion, even adapting it slightly to make it their own. For instance, the chief gods among the Hyksos were said to be Baal and Anat. Baal, however, was later associated by the Hyksos with the Egyptian god of chaos Set, of whom was integrated into the Hyksos pantheon. So despite the fact that the Egyptians often demonised the Hyksos as invaders, conquerors, and ruthless peoples of destruction and chaos, it seems that the Hyksos, in fact, acted to an extent for the betterment of Egypt later on down the line. But of course, you've probably guessed how it ends for the Hyksos. After all, for the past 2 videos, I've said multiple times how the Hyksos were eventually expelled from Egypt by the Thebans. So, let's get a look at how it all started. Let me just get my notes out. Let's have a look at how this all started then. Hang about. Oh my. Hippos. Seriously, an insult about hippos. And, okay, let me tell you something. If you think that's the most stupid thing to go to war over, oh, you ain't seen nothing yet, son. Then again, this is up there as pretty damn stupid. Not as, stupid as going to war over a bucket, though. Bologna, Modena, here's looking at you two. Okay, so I should probably explain how exactly this all started over a fence surrounding hippos. Right, okay, so it was a practice for Thebans to hunt hippos, and in fact, hippos were a part of the original Egyptian religion. For you see, the goddess Taweret, during the Middle Kingdom, developed a sort of cult and a significant following. Now, for background info, Taweret is known as the goddess in Egyptian mythology of childbirth and is the protectress of mothers and their newborn children. Now, there is no telling whether or not this account is true, but the Roman historian Manetho states that the Hyksos king Apepi one day sent a message to the Theban king Sekenenra-Ptah asking that he do away with a hippo pool to the east of Thebes, for the hippos kept Apepi awake day and night. This, as you can tell, as an insult to the creature that was known as the embodiment of Taweret, must have ticked the king off royally. This began a succession of conflicts with the Hyksos in Lower Egypt. Sekenenra-Ptah was killed during one of the first battles, and his son Ahmose took up the campaign and managed to drive the Hyksos almost as far north to the area surrounding their capital at Avaris, near the Nile Delta, and it's his successor, his brother Ahmose I, who finally took Avaris and drove the Hyksos from Egypt. And so in 1570 BC, Upper and Lower Egypt were once again reunited into one country, and so begins the New Kingdom of Egypt. So the New Kingdom of Egypt begins with the same guy, Ahmose I, who had retaken Lower Egypt and driven the Hyksos from the land, starting the 18th dynasty of Egypt and beginning the line of pharaohs. Yep, there we go. We've finally got the title of Pharaoh being used by Egypt's rulers, because the New Kingdom, or rather the Egyptian Empire as it's sometimes known, is the ancient Egypt that we are all most familiar with. This is because it was seen as Egypt's height, a continuation of Egypt's classical age from the Middle Kingdom, but even better. I say Egyptian Empire because this was Egypt at its greatest extent, extending as far south as modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, as far north as modern-day Turkey, and as far west as modern-day Libya. Now if you look at it, that would pretty much put the majority of the Eastern Mediterranean in Egyptian hands, and would allow Egypt to rise to such prominence that it is known as one of the world's possible first great powers. No, not world powers, we're not there yet, and oh god, no, there's that box again, there's Pandora's box. I am not touching that damn thing, put it in the bin. Okay, I know I'm gonna have to open that box sooner or later, but we're still in ancient times, so let's forget about that for now. So for now, we're not going to talk about Egypt's more familiar pharaohs yet. Keeping with our theme, we're going to keep it as chronological as possible. So let's delve further into the reign of Ahmose I, the first pharaoh of the new kingdom of Egypt. Unlike the 13th dynasty of Egypt, Ahmose I was known as someone who was far wiser and knowledgeable than his predecessors, who allowed the Hyksos peoples to gain so much control and influence in Lower Egypt, because he recognised that the Hyksos were able to gain so much power because internally Egypt's government had weakened. Of course, don't forget the kings of the 13th dynasty were known to be weak of will and character, and it was through some internal corruption that allowed the Hyksos to make treaties and deals with local rulers of Lower Egypt in order to gain enough political influence to challenge the central government. So, after driving the Hyksos from Avaris, Ahmose I chased them through the Sinai Peninsula up into the Levant and even as far as Syria in order to drive them from Egypt completely. And during his campaigns, he didn't treat them as expeditions per se. Instead, he began to create buffer zones around the immediate territory of Egypt, areas of land in which Egypt had at least influence or control over, sort of like vassal states. So Ahmose secured Egypt by way of a great contingency in the form of buffer zones, and it worked out pretty well for him, because by the time of his death, and in passing the throne to his successor, Amenhotep I, in 1541 BC, he had left Egypt stronger, more secure, and still a prosperous nation and centre of trade for his successor to preside over. In the way of expansion, we don't really get much with Amenhotep I except from a couple of campaigns into the Nubian kingdom of Kush to the south of Egypt. A kingdom of which, who during the second intermediary period had begun to push down on Upper Egypt's southernmost borders. So these campaigns, you could say, were kind of in retaliation, and they even managed to take some parts of Kush too, again creating even more buffer zones to secure Egypt's central position in the region. These buffer zones, therefore, you could say, were perhaps a reaction to Egypt getting a little bit afraid of perhaps being intermediary perioded again. If that makes sense. I mean, blimey, that was terrible English. Oh well, do what you can. So we have buffer zones around Egypt's immediate original borders, but we don't have anything resembling a major Egyptian empire yet. That will come a bit later. So we've cleared up that Amenhotep I's reign wasn't really known for any significant conquests or taking of land, just the expansion of buffer zones already set up by his predecessor, Ahmose I, and getting a bit of revenge on the Nubian kingdom of Kush to the south of Egypt. However, it's not just the expansion of these buffer zones that Amenhotep I is known for. No, he is known in expanding in the way of arts and religion, as well as the campaigns I've just mentioned. The Book of Coming Forth by Day, or as it's more well known, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. No, not that one. This one can't raise the dead or do any of that magic-y stuff, but it was still seen as an important part of Egyptian society, perhaps one of the first mass-printed books in history. The Egyptian Book of the Dead I'm discussing was in fact seen as more of a manual to navigate the afterlife of sorts. It told someone how to behave after death, how to approach and treat certain gods as they met them after their demise, and how to navigate the various landscapes to get through the afterlife in order to reach the field of reeds, prophesied in ancient Egyptian mythology and religion. Amenhotep I was also known as a sort of patron of the arts in ancient Egypt. He was said to be the patron of the artists' colony at Deir el-Medina, who would later be known for conducting works on art found within Egypt's famous Valley of the Kings, the resting place for many of Egypt's most well-known pharaohs. So instead of focusing on personal glory or external expansion of Egypt, Amenhotep I instead focused on what he had and expanded on that. He built great temples, stelae, was a patron of the arts, and a direct patron of the artist's cult of Deir el-Medina. And upon his death in 1520 BC, Amenhotep I was deified by that very same artists' colony in Deir el-Medina as the god, protector and eternal patron of their colony. Amenhotep I left Egypt strong, secure and internally prosperous once more. Little was done under him in the way of conquest and outward expansion, but internally he managed to keep the country stable and keep it growing internally. Maybe perhaps because he recognised that Egypt had only just begun to put itself back together, and so needed time to heal before any more expansion could be done externally. And then his successor said drop that because BOOM! You've got Thutmose who comes in and conquers literally everything in sight. But that is a tale for next time. So join me in the next episode of the Ancient Egypt series, where we explore the three Thutmoses, Thutmose I, Thutmose II and Thutmose III. Originality with the names, I know. But anyway, for now, we've got a prosperous and strong Egypt both internally and for now stable externally. But the question we need to keep asking ourselves is, can this last forever? I'm Lewis of the Grand Portfolio, and thank you for watching.